Hi, welcome to this week's Claire Chats. Now, please excuse the voice. I've come down with a cold. I always do this after a tour. I pick up a cold, I think, on the plane, and it sort of hits me towards the end of the tour, and then I come back with a really snuffly nose and sore throat. So excuse me if I suddenly start coughing or sneezing. I just wanted to share with you a few of the highlights of the tour. So I've just come back, if you haven't seen, just come back from the Discover the Tudors tour, which was sort of 8 nights of Tudor bliss, really, seeing lots of Tudor attractions. Absolutely fabulous tour. I didn't want it to end. It was such a good time. You can catch up with some of the highlights with the diary entries that I did each day. Excuse any typos or weird things in those diary entries, because I was writing them really, really late at night. Because I wanted to do it while it was fresh in my mind, but obviously it was after dinner and after sort of socialising with people, so they might not make the best of sense. But yeah, I'm just going to give you a rundown of the kind of things that we did on the tour and just share some highlights with you, because it really was Tudor bliss. So we started off the tour by going to Windsor, and it was amazing. The Heart and Garter Hotel. It's a really quirky historic hotel. I think it used to be one of the old sort of station hotels, as you've got the old stations that are pretty much next door to it. Really sort of quirky old-fashioned hotel. The amazing thing about it was that it was directly opposite Windsor Castle. It was, as our coach pulled up, you had Windsor Castle on the right and the hotel on the left, and breakfast, and I made sure that I sort of sat near the window for breakfast, because you looked out the window and there was Windsor Castle. Not just like a wall, but Windsor Castle, and that was just incredible. The positioning of that was brilliant. Our first full day, we had a private tour with a blue badge guide of Windsor Castle, and Philippa, my co-leader, who'd done so much organisation, she's such a star, she'd organised that the guide would focus on the Tudor history of the castle, because obviously the history of the castle, goes from William the Conqueror up to the present day, because it is our present Queen, Elizabeth II's home. Buckingham Palace is her office. She tries to spend the least time possible, apparently, at Buckingham Palace, having long weekends at the place that she calls home, which is Windsor Castle. So we had a very Tudor-focused tour, but also our guide sort of said to us, she says, I realise that there has been a rather recent wedding at Windsor, so I will tell you about the wedding as well, sort of Harry and Meghan's wedding. And we walked in the footsteps of George Clooney and, those celebrities walking around, walking to St. George's Chapel, and she pointed out that it's like we went to a bit that actually I'd never been to before, because I always thought it was private, but it's not. You sort of go through a walkway sort of at the bottom of St. George's Chapel, which are the residences of the choir. So it's quite a nice Tudor building, but it's got like a gateway through it. And you walk through that, and that is the kind of the front steps of St. George's Chapel, which Meghan entered the chapel, on her way into the chapel to, of course, get married. So there were nice little touches like that. But for me, the Tudor bits of it were the bits that stood out. We sort of got pointed out the bits that Elizabeth I had added. Like, she didn't like the kind of the open sort of walkway, the open gallery, because it was very blustery and that. So she covered it to create a sort of, an interior, a covered walkway for her to sort of, do her daily exercise along. And of course, St. George's Chapel with all of the tombs. I mean, obviously, you've got Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville in it. But, you've got, obviously, the vault with Henry VIII and Jane Seymour in, which is the same vault as well that Charles I's body was put into. You've got Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk. And, of course, you've got recent royals as well, like our present Queen's mother and father and sister are all in there. It's just so you're looking around at the tombs, but It's also obviously the chapel of the Order of St George, the Order of the Garter. So you've got all of the stall plates there of all of the Order of the Garter Knights. So you can sort of pick out ones. Like for me, Thomas Boleyn's stall plate there is of real significance. And then there's the hall in the castle where all of the shields are kind of on the ceiling, and then there are labels around telling you what number is who. And so I was looking for Thomas Boleyn there as well. Spotted him with the 3 bulls. It's very distinctive. So yeah, that was brilliant. And then we'd noticed that you could see Eton College from Windsor Castle, and it didn't look too far. So Philippa had said to me, because we had free time in the afternoon, you could go back into the castle if you wanted. But we thought, let's go for a walk. So we had a walk across the river, which was pretty in itself, picturesque, over to Eton College. Because, of course, Eton College was founded by King Henry VI in I think around 1440. And that is a beautiful building. I mean, we didn't go in it or anything. It's a school, it's Eton, where, obviously a private school. People like Boris Johnson sort of went there. It's a good school. So we didn't go into it. It was interesting walking towards it as well, because you saw the boys coming out of it. They've finished lessons or whatever, going for lunch, going around the town lunch, and they're all there in their nice white shirts with their sort of white ties or dicky bows, and their morning suits, they're with the tails, and they're very, very smart. So that was interesting. Hampton Court Palace we went to, had a great time there, private tour, and then free time in the afternoon to see the bits that were important to us, because you have to prioritise with Hampton Court Palace because it is huge. Philippa and I wanted to go to the Young Henry VIII exhibition, but also we wanted to go to the Cumberland Gallery, which is like an art gallery, because Siobhan, our guide, had pointed out that gallery is on the footprint of Henry VIII's old sort of royal apartments. And not much of those apartments exists today. It was sort of built over, but there is one tower, and then there are various bits and pieces. Like, we actually asked one of the stewards in the rooms, and here's a tip for you. The stewards love chatting to people because, most people go through the rooms with an audio guide sort of glued to their ear, not interacting at all. So the stewards really like you to interact with them. And so we sort of asked some questions and ended up with this steward sort of practically guiding us around the gallery, pointing out Tudor bits, like there's an old Tudor doorway, or this tower is Tudor, and you can see this, and then opening up a bit that isn't generally open to the public, just opening a door for us so that we could see a real Tudor staircase, and that was fantastic. So tip there, actually engage a steward, in conversation. I also had a question about ghost, and the steward said, I'll take you to another steward called Jo, who's our Tudor ghost guide. She does guided tours in the evenings, ghost tours. And so she told us loads and loads of stories of the ghosts, Hampton Court Palace, and people's experiences, supernatural experiences. So it is definitely worth talking to a steward. Another place we went to was Hatfield House in Hertfordshire. Now, the main house, the main palace is Jacobean. It was, built after the Tudor period, but not long after the Tudor period, in James I's reign, on the site of the old place, the old palace that Elizabeth I knew, that was Elizabeth I's childhood home, where she was brought up, also where she spent time after her house arrest she was imprisoned in the Tower of London, then house arrest in Woodstock, and then allowed to go back to her estate at Hatfield, where she was told that she had become queen. The only bit that really exists that Elizabeth would have known today is what they call the Old Palace, which is the Great Hall, and a bit on the side of it. That's the only bit left of the bit that Elizabeth would have known. But it's still worth going into the main house, because that's where all the sort of Tudor portraits are. It's where the rainbow portrait of Elizabeth is, where the ermine portrait of Elizabeth is, and also lots of portraits of the Cecils, William Cecil, Robert Cecil, because they had owned the house. In fact, it's still owned by the Marquesses of Salisbury today. So it's still worth going into the house. We had a private guided tour of that, and that was fantastic. And then we had a talk in the Great Hall about the history of the Great Hall and Elizabeth I's links to the property. We also saw some gloves that were owned. There were lots of things, lots of pieces of clothing that are linked to Elizabeth, but tenuously. But these gloves were actually worn by Elizabeth, so we got to see those. And it was a very blustery day, so we made the walk out to the tree sort of optional because it was over rough ground as well. But Philippa and I did take a group out to the oak tree. Now, if you don't know, there is this story that Elizabeth was reading with her ladies under an oak on the 17th of November, I think it is. I hope I got that right. My cold has gone to my head. 1558, when she was told that she was queen. The men rode up from London, came up to her, went down on their knees, told her that, the queen was dead. She was the queen. The queen is dead. Long live the queen. And she quoted from a psalm saying, "This is the Lord's doing. It is marvellous in our eyes." And, there's that story. Well, it's a little bit, probably a legend. Because this is November. And I mean, we were in September and it was blustery and cold. I can't quite imagine Elizabeth sitting under a tree reading in November, but perhaps she was taking a break from a ride, just in her grounds, or perhaps she just needed some fresh air and was having a walk. We don't know. But it's a lovely tale. But anyway, this oak tree, oaks live for hundreds and hundreds of years. But this oak tree did die. They have preserved it, but it did die and had to be, taken down. But our present queen, I think in 1985, Queen Elizabeth II actually planted a new oak tree on that same place, and there's a plaque about how that new oak was planted by Queen Elizabeth II, where Queen Elizabeth I was told that she was queen. So it is a special area. We don't know how true any of that story is, but Elizabeth was definitely at Hatfield when she found out she was queen. She had her first council meeting in the Great Hall at Hatfield as well. So amazing history regardless. Then I went back home because we then went on to Stratford-upon-Avon, which of course is where I'm from. I grew up in a village just a few miles from Stratford. Stratford was the place that we went shopping at weekends. It was a place where I went out with friends and that. It was really lovely going back because I was seeing it through new eyes. I got to go with a group who'd never seen it before. And all the places that I'd taken for granted, and sadly, that I'd never visited or hadn't had the chance to visit because they hadn't been sort of done up, restored, when I was a child or in my teens. I was getting to visit these places, and it was just all fresh and new, even though I knew Stratford so well. We obviously went to the birthplace, seeing John Shakespeare and his wife Mary Arden's home in Henley Street, where William Shakespeare was born. We went to see New Place, which was the property that Shakespeare owned and where he brought up his family. We went to Guildhall, which is a beautiful Tudor property, and it's where Shakespeare's schoolroom is. And in fact, it's still used by the boys of King Edward VI Grammar School today in the mornings. William Shakespeare went to the grammar school. We know that he did. So we went there to his schoolroom and had a lesson from Master Jenkins, who taught Shakespeare. I mean, how could he still be alive today? He got us reciting Latin and was telling us off. And, he was scary, he was. But it's really interesting because you get snippets. Like there is a Master Jenkins teaching a Welsh schoolmaster in Shakespeare's plays. He's drawing on his own experience. So yeah, little snippets like that in his later works. We went, it was pointed out to us that the chapel next door, sorry, the dog's having a scratch, the chapel next door, the Guild Chapel, they found John Shakespeare was told to, as bailiff and sort of mayor of Stratford, he was ordered to make sure that the wall murals that told the sort of Bible stories that were seen as very superstitious during the Reformation, that he needed to make sure that they were whitewashed over and covered over. And he did, but he kind of ordered that it wasn't to be done very well. I don't think his heart was in it, really. I think he quite liked them. And because he didn't do a very good job, well, the people he ordered to do the job didn't do a very good job, they've been discovered today. And it is wonderful. You go into this chapel, you can see these wall murals. Obviously, they're not as brightly coloured as they would have been in the Tudor times, but they've got pictures that are like they've mocked up, how they would have looked. And it's just amazing. So in our free time, quite a few of us went to that chapel to have a look. Then we had a guided tour of Holy Trinity Church, the resting place of Shakespeare, his wife Anne Hathaway, his daughter Susanna, and her husband John Hall. And it was just, wonderful going there, because in that church is the most accurate depiction of William Shakespeare that there is, because there is a bust on the wall that was commissioned by Anne Hathaway, Shakespeare's wife. So that bust has got to look like Shakespeare. She wouldn't have accepted, an image of his head that wasn't like Shakespeare. So that surely must be the most accurate depiction we've got of Shakespeare. So that was wonderful to see as well, and sort of pay our respects to the bard. And then we went to somewhere that I've never been to. We went to New Place, I mentioned that. But we went to Hall's Croft. Now, Hall's Croft was the home of Susanna, William Shakespeare's eldest daughter. Anne Hathaway was actually pregnant with Susanna when William married her. It was owned by her and her husband, John Hall. Now, John Hall was a very reputable, well-respected man. He was a doctor, a physician, and he had his dispensary at Hall's Croft as well as it being their home. It was their home before Susanna and the family moved back into New Place after William Shakespeare's death, because she inherited New Place and she cared for her mother Anne there, but it was still used as a dispensary by John. And it's just a beautiful Tudor property. They've done wonders with restoring it. And it's got lots of Tudor goodies in it. Like they've got the oldest children's high chair, baby's high chair, that I think is in existence there. There's lots of wonderful portraits, and they've got the dispensary kind of, as it would be in Tudor times, like tools that doctors would have used, snippets about the medicine that was used at the time, books of sort of remedies and that. But we got to see it after closing. We had a real VIP treatment, really, a private tour without any other tourists around. And then we ate there. And that was wonderful. We were eating in this Shakespeare's kind of, one of Shakespeare's homes. He would have gone there to see his daughter. And Philippa had a surprise for us as well. She'd organised some actors to perform Shakespeare just before we ate, while we were having our drinks. And what was amazing about these two actors is they said, we've organised that we're going to do this scene and this sonnet, but we take requests. Is there a particular scene or sonnet you would like us to do? And I was thinking, wow, I know that my complete works of Shakespeare is biblical proportions. How on earth can you do that? And yeah, every scene that our tour participants came up with, they managed to do. And it was just, mesmerising to have these two actors who were walking around our table, who were actually talking to us. I mean, we only had one gentleman at dinner that night. And so, because he got sort of used by the actors, he got picked on really and was performed to, and it was just an amazing experience. That was one of the highlights for me. As you can see, I've got lots of highlights, but that's me. I have lots of favourite things. Kenilworth Castle was next, and this is my second favourite sort of historical place after Hever Castle. Kenilworth, to me, I get really, really soppy about Kenilworth because I just see it as proof of Robert Dudley's love for Elizabeth I. I mean, they'd been friends since childhood. And her visit to the castle, I think it was in 1575, was 19 days, the longest time that she ever spent at a courtier's home. And everything that he did that for that visit, it just shows to me how much he loved her and how much he wanted to marry her. He built a gatehouse so that the castle, her entry to the castle was, fitting of a royal. He restocked the chase for hunting. He worked on the mere. He built a whole block of state apartments, royal apartments that were fitting for a queen and her household. He did a garden for her, a privy garden that was just for the Queen's use, which had an aviary in it. It had statues, obelisks, beautiful, fragrant herbs and flowers. What else did he do? Oh, and he devised courtly entertainments for her, masks, dances, everything, plays, all with the theme of love and marriage. And it was all his attempt to woo the Queen. It was a last-ditch attempt to win her hand in marriage. And unfortunately, it was all meant to end with this this dramatic sort of play, which would act as his proposal of marriage to her. So it was kind of leading up to it, and then there was going to be this major thing. But it got rained off. The weather was just too bad for it. But he did try, as Elizabeth left, he got some players to sort of run along her horse and kind of do little excerpts of it. But it was not to be, and sadly, Elizabeth didn't marry him, and instead he ended up getting married to, her relation Lettice, and the Queen was obviously the Virgin Queen. But to me, I just get really, really choked going around Kenilworth because I just think of the kind of the what if and how much they loved each other. And we had a talk from Dr. Elizabeth Goldring, who's done a lot of work on Robert Dudley and his art collection at Kenilworth, but also about, looking at his relationship with Elizabeth. And her talk was about the kind of the romance and, what, the evidence that we've got for it, really. And it just, to me, when Elizabeth finds out that Dudley has died and she just locks herself away and won't see anyone, and they have to threaten to break down her doors in the end, and the way that the last letter she received from him says, she put his last letter on it and kept that by her bedside, and it was found in her chest at her death. And I just think that she truly loved him, and I get all choked up at Kenilworth. But Kenilworth is even more brilliant than it used to be, because now you can actually get the views that Elizabeth enjoyed, because they've built stairs and platforms in the ruins of the Queen's apartments so that you can look out over the mere and the chase and just take in the views that Elizabeth would have had and just feel closer to her, because you can be in her bedroom and in her chambers. And it was amazing. It was very blustery, and they did tell us that they closed the platforms and the stairs if it got too windy. So we dashed up there before they could close them. So that was amazing. We went on to Bosworth Battlefield. Of course, the Battle of Bosworth, 1485, is the start of the Tudor dynasty, because, of course, it was at that battle that Richard III was killed and Henry Tudor became King Henry VII. Blustery day, so the battlefield walk wasn't for everyone. Philippa and I ended up taking a very small group around it. We went up to the memorial, which is like a sundial, and it's got the standards, the flags of Henry VII and Richard III, and also thrones for them, and a chair to, I think, Thomas Stanley as well. And then we walked from there past the little train station down to Ambient Woods, and just there you can see this well, Richard III's well, where he's said to have drunk from before the battle, and it says on the plaque that near to this is where, Richard III was killed, and that. So it's, for Richard III fans, that's a very important well. There was actually someone had left a bouquet of flowers there. Unfortunately, they'd left them in the plastic as well. Philippa and I were thinking that's not very good, really, but oh well. And then we walked back to the visitor centre, and they've got a huge exhibition there about, Henry VII, Richard III, the battle, weaponry, armour, all sorts. A very, very well thought out exhibition. And of course, the gift shop's rather good as well. I got a bit of a reputation for enjoying gift shops. So it's like, where's the gift shop? Tudor souvenirs, please. Then we moved on to London. As you can see, this is a jam-packed tour, but what was great is, although it was jam-packed, we had free time as well to sort of, to prioritise things and to go back and look at things. We went on to London Charterhouse. This is another place that has real meaning to me, because one of the low points, I feel, and there are quite a lot of low points, but one of the low points of Henry VIII's reign is his treatment of the Carthusian monks, the Carthusian martyrs. These monks were from London Charterhouse. Now, him and Cromwell picked these monks because people like Sebastian Newdigate, who were monks there, were actually personal friends of Henry VIII. And him and Cromwell kind of thought, oh, these monks, they'll have no problem signing the oath of supremacy, recognising, Henry VIII as supreme head of the church in England, because they like me. We're best buddies, and I can use them as a role model to everyone else. Look, the Carthusian monks have accepted it. You should too. Unfortunately, the monks didn't accept it. We actually sat in what is the chapel now at Charterhouse, but what was their chapter house, and it was where the oath was actually taken to them to read and to sign. They spent a night in prayer and then refused to sign it, and then because of their refusal, they were seen as traitors. Some of them got hanged, drawn and quartered, and we all know, I think, exactly what that entails and how much suffering, long drawn out pain that is. Some of them got starved. They were kept in chains and starved to death in prison. Awful, awful things to happen to people who were men of God. So that was very moving, being at London Charterhouse, but also just seeing how the monks lived, going into the cloisters, seeing the remains of the monks' cells. These were men who kept themselves in the sun, didn't have any interaction with other monks or other people. They had a little hole in the wall where their food was passed through. They didn't interact. But also we saw the Elizabethan side, the Tudor side of things, because when you had the dissolution of the monasteries in Henry VIII's reign, and after the Carthusian monks, of course, were martyred, it was turned into a Tudor mansion. You had Edward North owning the property, buying the property. And then you had, so he was Baron North. You had Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk, owning the property. And there are touches that you can see that speak of his time there, like on the ceiling in one of the rooms. You've got the Howard arms, but you've also got the Thistles of Scotland, because, of course, Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk, was executed eventually because of his involvement in the plots against Elizabeth, like the Ridolfi plot, which, he was going to marry Mary, Queen of Scots, and they were going to overthrow Elizabeth, put Mary on the throne, because he would have been her consort. And it was very reckless and unwise, isn't it, really, to put thistles on your ceiling. You're definitely, your allegiance is shown there. So you've got little touches like that. I really love Charterhouse. They've got a museum there now. When I visited before, they were working on a museum and gift shop. Now they have got a museum which tells the history of the site. It started off really before it became the monastery. It was a burial site of people killed during the Black Death, because that's in the 1300s, is it? Can't think. But yeah, I mean, John Stowe, I think, says 50,000 people were killed, but that, I think, is an exaggeration. But it was still tens of thousands of people and being buried at that point. So it was wonderful going to Charterhouse. We were shown round by one of the brothers. They're lay brothers now. They're not, they're not monks. They are lay brothers. He was so good. He got such a dry sense of humour. It was really, really good. But yeah, we went round the museum with Philippa and really enjoyed that too. So I'd recommend going to Charterhouse. The next day, we had a day of, a morning of Shakespeare. We took the Clipper, which is really good. That's a boat on the river. It's a great way of getting around London, actually, because you see, going along the Thames, you don't get stuck in traffic, and you get to see wonderful sights, like we saw St Paul's Cathedral and that. So we went on the Clipper up to where Shakespeare's Globe is. Now, this is a replica of Shakespeare's Globe, the theatre where he was an actor and where his plays were performed as well. Sam Wanamaker, the actor and director, was so shocked that British hadn't done anything about Shakespeare's Globe, that, that it didn't exist anymore. We hadn't done this, tribute to it, that he fundraised and to build a replica of it. He couldn't build it on the original site of the Globe. Philippa and I actually took a group down to the original site of the Globe, because there is actually a listed building on that site, more modern. I can't remember if it's Georgian or Victorian, but he couldn't obviously demolish that because it was historic in its own way. So he built it just round the corner, and it's just on the Thames. It's a wonderful sight as you come up to it on the Clipper. This black and white rounded building, very distinctive. And he built it there. He never lived to see it completed. Unfortunately, he died just a few years before it was completed, but it's a real legacy to him. And it is amazing. We had a private tour of the Globe. It was really good. We went round while we had some free time before our tour started, so we went round the exhibition, sort of telling its history and artefacts and everything. And then we had a tour of the Globe, and he took us into the part which is the theatre, which is open air, just as the Globe was. It was raining, so we weren't the groundlings who stood near the stage. We went into the kind of the stalls, sat on benches, so we were covered. But he pointed out the fact that they'd done it using original sort of techniques and also tools and building materials, about how they used I can't remember what they're called, but the wooden dowling bits instead of nails and screws. They used oak trunks to build the pillars on the stage, which are painted to look like marble, because there's a contemporary source that talks about sort of marble-looking wood. Whole tree trunks that go from the foundations into the roof. It's amazing. Lots of insights like that. Oh, and people, the groundlings, who actually had the best view, and the actors sort of interacted with them, so in a way they had the best experience. But they were there for about, I think it was a few hours, 3 hours or so before the performance started, all drinking beer and that. Then a performance could last about 3 hours, so they're there for 6 hours drinking beer the whole time. So he did point out that, they were weeing, in that bit. Ugh, not very nice at all. Rather stinky if you were in that bit. You might get the best, the best performance, but you were in the really stinky bit. So perhaps you were better being a rich one and being in the stalls. So that was wonderful, getting those insights. And then we actually had, as part of our private tour, we got a dressing up kind of demonstration. These were costumes, not accurate costumes, as in, they're not made in without zippers and without this and that. They didn't have zippers. They did sort of cross-laced and everything, but for example, the ruff was actually sewn together, whereas a ruff in those days, you would have just had, a piece of material that was then starched, using a hot iron, it was pleated. You can't be doing that before performances. So obviously they had to do some modern stuff. But these were all costumes that were used for performances at the Globe. And we had a costume that Lady Capulet wore in Romeo and Juliet, and a costume that Ophelia from Hamlet wore. And we just saw all of the layers, from the hose, the smock, the kirtle, the partlet, all sorts. So they did recreate Elizabethan costume, but with a little bit of a modern sort of twist, just to make it easier for the actors to sort of put them on. So we got 2 of our ladies were dressed up in these costumes, and that was so much fun. But we also got lots of information, about how the Tudors and Elizabethans kept clean. The fact that although they didn't bathe that often, they rubbed their skin with linen cloth, which absorbed the oils and got off dirt. And I think it was Ruth Goodman did that for a while as an experiment, and found that it actually did keep you just as clean as bathing. Really, it did work. So we got little snippets like that as well. And then we moved on we got the clipper again down the river to the National Portrait Gallery. And then, the National Portrait Gallery is huge. It's got an exhibition of Michael Jackson at the moment, and there's loads and loads of different galleries. Our focus was the Tudor Gallery. So we took the escalator up to the Tudor Gallery. And, of course, we came face to face with the portraits that you see all the time in books and online. The MPG portrait of Anne Boleyn, the cartoon of Henry VIII, which was Holbein's cartoon that was his design for the mural, the White House mural, which no longer exists. Portraits of Elizabeth, portraits of Francis Drake, Sir Francis Walsingham. All of these iconic Tudor people are just there in, one gallery. And it's fabulous seeing them in the flesh. There's nothing like standing sort of face to face with Anne Boleyn, that portrait that I know so well, but that I was actually seeing in the flesh. It was an amazing experience. I loved that. So that they were really coming to life as you sort of walked around them. So I really enjoyed that. Then Philippa had decided that it was a great experience for us to then get, a double-decker red London bus back to our hotel. So that was fun. We did that, and that worked very well. Other highlights for me, I loved the talks. Obviously, one of them was mine. I spoke about Henry VIII from Renaissance Prince to Tyrant, just looking at the different theories as to how he changed, whether he did in fact change, the deeds that he did that could be called tyrannical, what made him, how he was this Renaissance prince, and the hopes for his reign and that. So I did quite a detailed talk on that, which was I think people found it interesting. It was a good evening. The talk from Elizabeth Goldring about Robert Dudley and Elizabeth was really good. I've already spoken about that. And then we had Leanda de Lisle talking about the rise of the Tudors, and like Owen Tudor meeting Catherine de Valois, and how obviously they established the Tudor line, really, and how Henry VII came to the throne. And that was a really, really interesting talk. Leanda is just so natural and so knowledgeable. You could throw any question at her and she's got a wonderful answer. So that was a really entertaining evening, really, really good. So I've just spent sort of 9 days of just talking Tudor and seeing Tudor sites. So I've had Tudor bliss, really, and now kind of come home to reality. So no Tudor sites. Oh, and I got very well fed as well. I think a diet is needed. Lots of big breakfasts and 3-course meals with wine. So it was a fabulous tour. I can't wait to go on another one. Just Tudor bliss. So I hope you've enjoyed my diary entries and also just this rundown of my sort of highlights. But perhaps my main favourite thing was actually seeing these places with like-minded people. You just enjoying it with people that understand why you're enjoying it, that are in Tudor bliss with you, that you point something out to them and they're as excited about it as you are, conversing with other Tudor history lovers, debating over dinner or breakfast. Suddenly you're debating a Tudor topic. Oh, heaven. Because when you're at home, unless you're very lucky, you're not living with the other Tudor history lovers. I mean, I've indoctrinated our family, but it's still like, eyes glazing over, mum's off again. And to actually be talking to people over a drink or over dinner about Tudor topic, and their eyes are lit up. They're not falling asleep. They're not glazing over. They're lit up. So for me, perhaps that really was my main highlight, is just the people. Other Tudor history lovers and all of the tour members were just beautiful people in and out. I just loved spending time with them. So yes, I hope you can see how much I loved the tour and can't wait to go back on one. Anyway, I will see you soon and I hope you have a very good weekend. Take care. Bye-bye. By the way, if you do fancy coming on a Tudor tour and talking Tudor all the time with me and with Philippa, my co-leader, you can go and have a look on what history tours are on offer at britishhistorytours.com. We're running 2 tours at least next year, the Anne Boleyn Experience and Executed Queen's Tour. We will hopefully be launching more tours as well. So do sign up to the mailing list to be the first to hear about these tours, because spaces are limited and they do sell out quite quickly. So I would love to meet more Tudor history lovers and have Tudor bliss with you. So yes, do sign up to hear about more tours there, and I hope to meet you one day. So thank you for joining me.